Hello, everybody, and welcome back to this episode, another episode of Detonation. Sorry, I just been on holiday and I'm just back, so I'm a little bit rusty. But that's not a joke with my name either. I'm just a bit rusty. But I'll be back in action. We're back here. We've got the three wonderful people. We've got the chairman, Chairman Gennady from the United States. We've got Ira Parser, who people haven't been introduced to yet, but someone who's absolutely fundamental. He does a really good work on the advocacy for both the USTP and Radical Life Extension. And of course, we have candidate Ben Zion. Thank you very much, everybody, for coming along to this special episode. Now, I wanted to frame this debate, talk, discussion, panel, roundtable, whatever you want to call it, with this idea of live forever or die trying. I think that's how I want to open this, because essentially that's what most of the people in the USTP and others are trying to do. I mean, there are certain people. Transhumanism is a broad tent. It has a wide range of views, and there's some people who are not in transhumanism in order to perpetuate immortality, so to speak. They want certain extension, they want better quality of life, they want the end of scarcity. Immortality isn't on the tip of everybody's tongues, but at the same time, immortality or better health, better wealth, longer lives, longer happier lives is definitely on the tip of everyone's tongue. So live forever or die trying is how I wanted to frame this Radical Life Extension advocacy panel. I think that's what we're calling it. And I wanted to start off with a quote from a good friend of mine, a colleague of mine here in Australia, Peter Zing. He says, "We're at the inflection point of being able to cure all diseases, including the aging process, solving intelligence, and conquering scarcity to create abundance." And of course, a radical life extension, it can be a human conception, but also, we have Greta Thunberg out there, talking to these big politicians out in the world there, and you can radical life extension of the ecosystem, of environment systems, of other systems as well. And so I think that is important, noting within the context of this, being able to cure all diseases, not just for humans, but for plants and animals and other species as well, including non-sentients and others, and solving intelligence issues, because that would be that's really important, because to solve issues you need to think smarter. It's all about thinking smarter, working less hard and thinking smarter. And conquering scarcity to create abundance is absolutely important, especially with humans, because we have, death denial, Darwinian fallacies that are embedded into the human consciousness, and we're trying to overcome that. The other quote I wanted to just quickly read out was a Nick Bostrom quote. "Transhumanism is loosely defined movement that has developed over the past 2 decades, but most rapidly in the past 2 to 3 years. It represents an interdisciplinary approach to understanding and evaluating the ethical, social, and strategic issues raised by present and anticipated future technologies. The focus is especially on those technologies that either pose a threat to the survival of human civilization, or in contrast promise to create opportunities for overcoming fundamental human limitations." That's Nick Bostrom. And I like that quote as another way to frame this discussion. I think that these are really good. And just to remind people, some really important people in this circle, so just as a rehash, would be people like Aubrey de Grey, Adelaide Carpenter, Ray Kurzweil, David Sinclair, Laura Deving, David Goebel, and Liz Parrish and others, the geneticists and things. So, there's a whole wide range of topics to talk about. But firstly, let's go around the room and introduce everyone after I set that up. Chairman Gennady, you take us off. Firstly, go vote. That's the message coming from the USTP right now, right? Go vote. Go vote.
Yes, indeed. We are in the midst of our historic presidential primary election, where currently 8 candidates are contending for the U.S. Transhumanist Party's endorsement for President of the United States. And We initiated voting late on September 21st. We hope to have voting open for at least until the end of this week, but possibly beyond that if we need to in order to reach our quorum of half the membership voting. So if you are a member of the U.S. Transhumanist Party, please check your email for a link to the ballot, and please vote whichever candidate you favor. We need your voice, we need your participation. But in terms of the theme of this panel, Live Forever or Die Trying, a good friend of mine, Dr. Bill Andrews, who lives in northern Nevada and with whom I've run quite a few times, likes to use that expression as well. He has a company called Sierra Sciences, which aims to extend the human lifespan by inducing the expression of telomerase in order to essentially prevent the telomeres at the ends of the human chromosomes from shortening with each replication. So that's definitely a dedicated life extensionist who has undertaken that as his motto. In my view, that's really the only reasonable approach to have to the question of life extension, because while nothing in life is guaranteed, and survival is certainly not guaranteed for any of us as individuals, the best we can do is try, using the resources available to us, using the technology available to us. And the key difference right now, as compared to prior eras and prior generations, is that we actually have a fighting chance because of technological advancements that are on the horizon. And I think the proper attitude is key in order to succeed in this endeavor. One has to look past these age-old rationalizations for death, these age-old ways that people have found to make peace with death, and instead assert that death is wrong. Death is Wrong is my children's book on indefinite human life extension. And this book attempts to show to children, teenagers, as well as adult readers who are interested, some basic philosophical arguments as well as practical possibilities for why we should live longer and how it might be possible, how there are already examples in the natural world of creatures that do not senesce, for instance, or that have much longer lifespans than humans do. And I'm sure Ira will be able to speak to this in much greater depth, but people need to know that the traditional human life cycle is far from the only alternative available even in the natural world. And if giant tortoises or lobsters or bristlecone pine trees can have these extraordinarily long lifespans, why can't we? There's no law of nature prohibiting it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for those opening statements. Ira Pastor, it's so nice to have you here, gracing us with your presence. We've been looking forward to having you on the show for a long time now. We've seen you on the Why Am I Transhuman? You keep popping up there because that's a really, really good short. But who are you and what do you do and what do you specialize in? What do you advocate? Give us a quick bio, for Detonation people, and then tell us what you think about the subject that we're talking on. We've heard a wide discussion already.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm Ira Pastor. I'm a 35 plus year veteran of what you might think of as the traditional pharmaceutical industry. Was sort of brought up in it, and it's what I know, but at a very sort of early stage of that sort of development, I kind of got bored with the fact that this amazing, $1 trillion a year industry was incapable of curing us of pretty much anything. We invented the antibiotic, about 100 or so years ago, and with the exception of that, we can't cure you of anything, from your Alzheimer's disease to your congestive heart failure to cancer name your chronic degenerative disease responsible for human suffering and death. It's a pretty bad situation, and I really wanted to get back to something a little different. And I joke that aside from that education, my real education came early on reading comic books and watching science fiction films, because I always saw this really fascinating future. Whether it was these technologies in one manner or another existing in some sort of fictional Hollywood future, but came to realize between that and sort of my love for the natural world that, hey, here we are, one species out of estimated something like 8 to 10 million that exist on this planet, and we're although we see ourselves at the top of this evolutionary food chain, we're one of the weakest organisms out there. We don't have the regeneration skills of the amphibians. We don't have the cancer reversion skills of the planarians. We can't turn back time, as like the immortal jellyfish. We can't, enter a stage of negligible senescence like many organisms. Yet here we are, and so. Sort of my goal has been since then to really look at this next generation of biology and biotechnology that really can explore the depths of why can all these other species do this stuff and why can't we, and how we can ultimately make the transition through interesting bioproducts and technologies to latch on to what I refer to as the ability of nature's transhumanists to do all this fascinating thing. And frankly, as I say, anyway, I have discussions about this. I don't believe anything's off the table. The literature is full of data from the last century on fascinating, elegant solutions to many of humanity's problems that have already been solved by the natural world. There is a reason why plants and fish and amphibians and many other species have survived for hundreds of millions to billions of years on this planet without the problems that kill us within 70 years. And it's a matter of linking up with that knowledge and really understanding it and translating it into something useful for human transhumanism. And that's my goal moving forward.
Wow, fascinating. Thank you so much. And it's really nice to have you again, as we said, here on Detonation. We really, really appreciate it. So thank you. Ben Zion, Radical Life Extension, your campaign slogan sounds something like that. Tell us about what your relationship with this topic is.
Yes. Inspiring words from both of these panelists. Truly inspiring. Yes, our campaign slogan is Radical Life Extension is closer than you think. And you've heard it before, and it is absolutely true. What Ira Pastor was saying a few moments ago about the prospects for life extension, looking at the genomes of other creatures. We have to keep an open mind about all of these things. Just as in the post-Enlightenment world, in the industrial world, we saw a tripling of life expectancies, and that tripling of life expectancies did not come at the cost of some Faustian bargain. It did not come at the cost. It came as a matter of course through techno progress and through things like universal literacy and other things that have strengthened our civilization. This is what we will continue to do. Even now in the early 20th century at a quicker and quicker pace, with every passing day and month, we see more evidence of this. So it's something that we as a civilization must embrace. And I really like what you said at the beginning, Steele. You mentioned this brave young woman, Greta Thunberg, and these climate change protests and actions that she's done. 1 year ago, Greta Thunberg was standing alone with a clapboard, and now 4 million people last week joined her in protest. If we could do something like this for life extension, bring people together to understand, to create a broad societal consensus, what a thing that would be for those 100,000 people who die of old age every day. What a thing that would be for all of us. As a society, we would be remembered, I think, quite well in history for having done so. So I would encourage people to please vote. Don't wait any longer. Please take action. Speak to your friends. Speak to your loved ones about these very realistic breakthroughs as it relates to them. Don't be shy about this. You have a lot to gain in being bold in this area. Thank you.
Yes. I do wish, by the way, that Greta had taken up life extension as her cause. Imagine her essentially shouting at the world, how dare you let 100,000 people die every single day of aging? How dare you be complacent when there's all of this misery and suffering and disease and death? I think that could be quite an effective message, because people have been so habituated to these diseases of old age, but these are the greatest killers by far.
And it would allow us to...
Dr. Dan Elton calls it the pro-aging trance. Sorry, Ben, go continue.
No, just that even making some small inroads to treating aging as a disease and having public health outcomes of this kind, it would allow us to much more easily solve these other existential risks and grand societal challenges. Every person that dies is indeed a tragedy, but it also represents a tremendous loss of knowledge and work that they've done in their life that could have well continued, and that comes at a great cost to our society as well.
Yes, every person that dies is essentially an irreplaceable universe of ideas, of memories, of skills, of achievements, of sensations, and it cannot be regained if that person is gone. And indeed, to me, the complacency that exists in the world about it is astonishing. We should have today orders of magnitude more people in the life extension movement than are participating in it, but it has dawned upon me that really it is up to us. Nobody else is going to save us or bring these technologies about. It is up to us to do everything we humanly can to advance this prospect within our lifetimes.
I think I'd like to start. I want to comment on that. I think that's a good. I actually wanted to start with prevention. So I wanted to go to the Industrial Revolution and ask each of you why you think we've got to where we are. But I just want to add a thought to that, and I think the sales pitch. See, with this Greta Thunberg idea, she's kind of right in the fact that they do complain about GDP, and we've talked about GDP on this show as an irrelevant metric, something that it's not irrelevant, but it could be altered, it could be changed, it could be broadened to include more more inputs. Including wellness, health, society, like they do in Switzerland, like they do in the Nordic countries. I mean, there are more conceptions of life than just your gross domestic or your gross local output. I mean, your finished goods and services. I mean, yes, it's important, but it's not wholly important. And I think the way the world has been structured in the post-oil, since we've gone from the oil world to the finance world, everything flows down from finance, and it kind of feels like she's right in that way, saying, why are you talking about GDP? Why aren't you talking about a wider range of concerns? And her concern, obviously, that she wants to add to that input is the health of the environment. I mean, on this show over and over again, I say it's an environmental holocaust. I've been saying that forever. It is a holocaust. But I think in the messaging of just going off what Gennady said, if transhumanists or transhumanism in general could somehow message telegraph that by implementing radical life extension, yes, you're saving some of those knowledge set and skills, but you're actually accumulating more knowledge and more information in order to solve the problems that these people are talking about. In order to solve the environmental problems, in order to solve the health crisis, and sort of solve the social issues, redirected and reformed. But there is a messaging gap where a lot of people just assume that radical life extension does mean endless population growth without a cap, without limit. And they say, that's not going to be good for the environment. Gennady or Ira, what do you say to that idea that transhumanism is kind of either lost message or off message, or needs to just find its message and push against some of that?
Well, I think transhumanism has the correct message. It's a challenge to get more people to hear that message. But the common concerns are really quite easy to respond to. For instance, this whole overpopulation scenario really is already undermined by long existing trends in more developed countries, countries where people get greater levels of education and have higher standards of living. Reproduction rates fall consistently, and they're actually falling all over the world, not just in the most advanced countries. They're falling in the Middle East. They're falling in sub-Saharan Africa. It's just they started at a higher level. So now instead of having 7 or 8 children per family, a typical family might have 4 or 5 children in those parts of the world. But as those countries become even more developed, the population growth rates will slow down. What most people don't realize is even if everybody stopped dying tomorrow, which is essentially the best case scenario for life extension advocates, we would still not have the same level of population growth as the world had already experienced during the baby boom of the mid-20th century. But I think an even greater fallacy underlies this kind of objection, and that is the notion that everything else will remain static when indefinite life extension is achieved. So a lot of people just imagine people not senescing and dying, but the rest of the world remaining as it is today. And that certainly is not going to happen because technologies advance in parallel. A lot of people think, oh, we need to prioritize X, Y, and Z before we can get to indefinite life extension. We need to prioritize ending world hunger or getting clean water to people. But in reality, the same ingenuity that can achieve indefinite life extension can also be applied to ending world hunger and getting water to people. This is why several of the candidates in the Transhumanist Party presidential primary have emphasized those issues. One of the candidates, Charles Holsopple, has his Project 222 initiative, and in addition to advocating life extension, he's advocating technological means to get a basic minimum of food, water, and shelter to every person in the world. So I think transhumanists need to emphasize we are about advancing technology on all fronts, but life extension provides us essentially an order of magnitude increase in capability to do that, because there are more people around with the skills, with the experience, with the knowledge to advance these technologies, and these synergies are achieved as these people act in all areas of life. The people whose lifespans are extended are not just going to work on life extension technology, they're going to work on other areas of technology too.
Absolutely. Ira, what do you think about transhumanism's messaging and some of the negativity framed around that?
I think it's doing a pretty decent job in sort of the general in general the general messaging. You know, Gennady's right on target with everything that I typically talk about when I get asked those questions about how advancing in one area is potentially mess everything else up. So completely with the same view there. One of the other aspect that I wanted to mention along those lines, we were saying about advancing things happening in parallel. One of the issues with we define sort of aging in general. There's sort of this sort of misconceived notion that it's just about sort of biologic fitness, when it really, biologic aging we look at as a much more inclusive thing that entails not just your fitness, but also other parameters such as robustness, defined as the ability to prevent stuff from happening to you, resilience, the ability to bounce back, and then fertility, which is big part of the aging equation. And, talking about things happening parallel, as we move forward on the topic of radical life extension with these products and technologies, ultimately fertility is one of those things that's going to move along at the same time. It's not a matter that if you do have a lifespan of 500 one day, that you're still going to be, on the same biologic clock per fertility. It may be that you don't want to have your first kid till you're 250. So a lot of those dynamics move in parallel with the overall picture of curing this aging problem. But I think I'm completely on the same page as Gennady with regard to it's pretty easy to diffuse most of those arguments today. There's a much bigger reason to do these things than not to do so in advancing the human condition.
Ben Zion, you're a candidate at the moment. Depending on where you go in your future career, what message would you like to carry on the transhumanist banner? Going forward, regardless of where you end up. When people come at you with these sorts of arguments.
Yes. Well, I do have to say, express my admiration for the founder of this party, Zoltan Isfin, as a life extension advocate. He has been without peer, and he was in some ways our true north. He did keep us focused on life extension. He inspired people to want to be doing that, and I hope to emulate him in that regard. I do think that life extension is, as is stated in all of these many charter documents, it is the top core value of our organization and people within the organization, and I will continue to say that unabashedly, and that is what I intend to be doing. As candidate for the United States Transhumanist Party, and I'm proud to be able to do so. Yes, radical life extension. It is worth fighting for, and it is coming. So get ready.
So just in a really quick under 2-minute answer, how did we get to here to the 21st century? Well, no, you can go as long as you want, really. It's a big question. But how did we end up where we are in the 21st century genome world with the internet and the scientific method and laboratories which are specialized in certain things? How do we end up with SENS? How do we get there from from agricultural beings that were running around that had almost no, misguided direction in the past, where they were focused on purely momentary problems of food, water, shelter, the lower hierarchy of needs. I mean, obviously there was a huge health explosion in the 1930s. Sir Francis Bacon unboxed a lot with the scientific method. But how did we get here to the point where we can have this panel today talking about potential for some sort of immortality or radical life extension? How did we get here? Gennady?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Well, I would suggest that humans have, as long as they've had a rational faculty and the ability to anticipate the future, been confounded by this problem of death and sought ways to overcome it. Religion originated as a way to try to overcome the problem of death by positing some sort of continuity of the human being or the essence of the human being after the death of the biological organism. The issue with that approach, in my view, is that there is essentially no concrete evidence to support any such perpetuation of existence after the death of the body. As science and technology continued to advance, of course, people tried new ways, and the Age of Enlightenment really brought a systematization to human thinking that allowed for more methodical scientific experimentation in overcoming the causes that shortened lifespan. We have to keep in mind that life expectancy today is about 5 times greater than it was during the Paleolithic era. It's about 2 times greater than it was during the beginning of the 19th century. And this was because of the systematic application of scientific rationality. So the low-hanging fruit were the infectious diseases, and those were tackled one by one from the 18th century through the mid-20th century until we got to this point in the contemporary world where the vast majority of deaths are from the diseases of old age. But the problem of the diseases of old age became a greater focus fairly recently. Even cancer was not as great of a focus of public health advocates until the 1960s, 1970s. That was an era when increasingly public figures, politicians, large institutions were convinced to devote significant funds to the war on cancer. But prior to that, in the mid-20th century, suggestions that there should be a concerted war on cancer were as fringe as suggestions that there should be a concerted war on aging today. And that, I think, was a function not just of the resources available at that time, but also societal attitudes. Keep in mind, human life was cheap, even in the early and mid-20th century. The world fought 2 of the most destructive wars ever in human history, where people were essentially sent to die in mass waves just to gain a slight advantage, a few feet of territory from the other side. That's how cheap human life was considered to be. Indeed, problems like pollution, problems like chronic disease were seen as more of a backdrop of life if one was lucky enough to survive the wars, to survive the political repressions, to survive the causes that killed one early on. This is still within the living memory of some. But fortunately, we had a relatively peaceful period after World War II when we had entire generations growing up thinking, there must be a better way to live. There must be some improvements we could make to the world as a whole. And this was often a process of 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Certainly not every development since World War II has been ideal or in the correct direction, in my view. Some of those developments, unfortunately, have sought to undermine Enlightenment philosophy and rational philosophy more generally. But there are still enough people who adhere to rational philosophy, especially in the sciences, that just from a probabilistic standpoint, there would be people to ask questions about how can biological aging be overcome? How can we reverse the deterioration in our bodies that accumulates with time? So I think people like Aubrey de Grey, like Bill Andrews, like Ira Pastor here, are examples of thinkers who emerged during this more peaceful period of time, who had time to contemplate the natural world and find ways to apply the scientific method to improving the human condition. And we need more such people. We need the entire world to start thinking in this way. But ultimately, we have to start somewhere with the supporters whom we have and spread our message out from there.
Ira Pastor, how did we get here? How did we get here?
Well, we got here. It's a great story. You know, if we go in our time machine and we go back a couple hundred years, you know, what were we studying in biology labs all over the world? We were studying organisms because that's all we knew. We could observe these things and take notes, whether they were plants or fish or amphibians or whatever. Then a couple hundred years ago, the microscope came into play, and we realized, hey, you know, we're not just these organisms. We're made up of these little things called cells, which were interesting in their own right. Cell era came into play, and then halfway through the 20th century, we figured out this stuff called DNA, and we entered the molecular phase. And since then, you know, we took this continued path of looking deeper and deeper at proteins and genes and microRNAs, really, find sort of the essence of what life was all about. Then we got to a point somewhere around the turn of the century, we realized that, all these genes and proteins and microRNAs and stuff are really interesting, but by themselves in a vacuum, they don't explain a lot. That these systems, whether it's DNA or cells or tissues or organs or whole body segments, have more complexity to them. And that's ushered in a very interesting era of tools like systems biology, like complex emergent systems, where we're beginning to see that all this minutia is important, but it has to be placed in context of what the folks were doing a couple hundred years ago. Ultimately, regeneration of an organ, a heart, or part of your brain or a limb, it's not about that chemical or that gene, but it's the interaction, the unique ways that our bodies, all of these, what we'll call the hierarchical levels of life, work together. And I don't think we've ever been at a better point where we've not just had sort of the understanding of this unique hierarchy, but we've had the computational power, the machine learning, the AI, and everything goes along with it that can really show us in real time how all of this works. And when we want to get to doing something finally in 2019, like figuring how to regrow a limb, or how to reconnect a severed spinal cord, we can begin finally to understand the complex system dynamics that make it possible. And we can understand it in the amphibian, and we can understand it in the planarian, and ultimately we can understand this unique complexity that goes to making it happen in humans. So it's been a really interesting set of cycles or set of waves that have come along over the period, and it's I'm a big fan of history, of medical history, and to all the stuff that we've learned in the past, but you've sort of thrown away as the new stuff has come along. But science, for it to really advance, has to take into account everything that comes before it. And I think we're finally at that stage where we're not only accepting of that, but where we have the tools to really understand it. So that's what makes 2019, from a transhumanist perspective, in the radical life extension, such an exciting time.
Thank you very much. Inspiring words. All right, so Ben Zion, how did we get here?
Yes. It's a good question. In the comments, Dr. Dan Elton, who's a great friend to me, and who is a tremendous supporter of the United States Transhumanist Party, of the Futurist New Deal for America, and the Ben Zion 2020 campaign. He commented that economist Herb Simon has mentioned how larger populations resulting in more people working on science and technology, a kind of a network effect that in some sense predates the network world. And that is very much a story of the universal literacy, the interactions between different civilizations and continents, and ultimately the networked world, which has allowed people to use that literacy to greater effect, to become culturally literate in other ways, so that people are now aware of these kinds of technologies. We stand also on the precipice of another network effect, a sea change of this kind, in the form of more robust digital assistants and artificial personalities, which could add many millions of man hours to this marketplace, allowing for a dramatic increase in this very effect. And that's an exciting prospect. You might not think that relates to medicine and these public health outcomes, but we know that that techno progress has been, and in our world today, also advanced algorithms. These things have been drivers of all manner of advancement, including emerging biomedicine. So these are important things to be considering when looking at this history, and certainly in the near future, tremendous implications there as well.
All right, so thank you for that. All right, so now we know how we got here. essentially, let's turn to where are we going, and let's start with the technologies or the technological focus. Ira Pastor, you mentioned regrowing limbs, regenerating limbs and organs in a biological context. Ben, you were talking about algorithm-driven advances. Gennady, a whole swath of different advances. What technologies are you excited about that will assist in radical life extension, and where is it going in a more general context, Chairman Gennady?
Yes, so I think advances in radical life extension will come about through a convergence of technologies, and we're already seeing some treatments emerge that could assist in this. For instance, stem cell treatments, gene therapies, immunotherapy against cancer, they're all going to play a role, but they're going to be assisted by new drugs that are discovered through AI algorithms that could sift through various compounds a million times faster than human discoverers possibly could. These treatments will be assisted by nanotechnology, which might be able to deliver targeted doses of treatments into cells. For instance, deliver a targeted dose of chemotherapy into a cancer cell without killing healthy cells. These advances will be fueled by personalized medicine, by various devices that could measure vital bodily statistics in real time and tell people, oh, you now have a problem with your blood sugar, or you have a problem with another key metric. And people would be able to diagnose those problems early and monitor how various lifestyle interventions affect them. And eventually, I think what will happen within 20 to 30 years, if there's enough funding and public support for these technologies, would be that people come in periodically for a suite of rejuvenation treatments that essentially roll back each of the 7 major types of damage to the cells of the organism that Aubrey de Grey describes as the goal of the SENS approach to overcome. So that is going to be the incremental trajectory. There's not going to be a single point in time in which we could say, oh, all aging has been cured. Rather, we're going to have increasingly effective treatments that will continue to extend lifespan and push back the advent of these diseases. And the longer people live, the greater their probability of surviving to the arrival of the next treatment. This is, of course, the concept of longevity escape velocity. But we are not going to wake up one day and say, oh, we're immortal, we're indestructible, we're invulnerable. Rather, it's going to be a process, and we have to live to see each subsequent wave of advances. Of course, the longer we live, the lower our probability of death will be.
Thank you very much for that. That was very good. Ira Pastor, enlighten us where we are going and kind of the technologies that you're kind of excited about.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll take where Gennady ended off there and go a little further. There's a caveat, and that is, once again, we live on a planet with many species that already are capable of turning back biological time to do things like regenerate complex organs and limbs, like turn cancer into normal healthy tissue, and in certain cases rejuvenate most or all of their bodies and turn themselves back into a biologically younger state. We have, strangely, interestingly known, the scientific community has known probably since the mid-1950s why this is possible. And it is as follows. Species that are capable of doing these things, in essence rendering themselves either non-aging or age reversers, have two abilities. One is the ability to so-called reestablish the embryogenic potential of their cells. And this is sort of seen in the sort of the modern tools of cellular reprogramming. The second thing they're capable of, which is extremely important, is to reestablish what we'll call the morphodynamic architecture of their tissues. The ability to say, hey, here's some new young cells, let's reform a new young heart or liver or kidney or brain in this location. With those two things being achievable, we enter a unique stage where, granted, you may not be able to live for tens of thousands of years, but there's not much holding you back. So I sort of see that as the second wave, because you could talk about sort of the perpetual upkeep, sort of the Sen's model of looking at your body as a car that can be repaired occasionally. But there's other things that don't go in the car that happen in the human body, namely the unique ways the systems work together. In the automobile, the brakes don't affect the windshield wipers, and the engine doesn't affect the seat warmers and so forth. In the human body, things are a little different. So I do see another wave occurring after sort of the damage repair component of this equation, where we're talking about whole organism rejuvenation. And once again, that's going to follow a pattern that's going to be substantially more complex than sort of the interventions of the pharmaceutical industry that I come out of creates today. It's not going to be single drugs that do one thing. It's going to be what we refer to as combinatorial biologics, the ability to create really novel, innovative biotherapeutic interventions that do more than one thing. And when I say do more than one thing, affect more than one target in the process of regeneration, repair, and rejuvenation, because it really is a multifunctional, multifactorial system. We know how amphibians do it. We know how planarians do it. We know immortal jellyfish do it. It's a matter of thinking a little bit creatively into what our therapeutic interventions are going to look like and applying those ultimately to humans. And they may not be, as I say in other shows, that little white pill that you get at your local Rite Aid. They might not even be biochemical at all. They may be electrical in nature. They may be living therapeutics with the whole area of the virome and the microbiome coming online. They're going to look substantially different than, as I say, that little white pill, but they will be fascinating. The things they'll be able to do in the coming decades will be equally fascinating.
Thank you very much. That's incredible. And just a supplement, an additional question to you while you're talking.
Sure.
What other lessons can we draw from nature? I mean, you've mentioned a couple of these different animals, and I know Gennady has a sample of some of those animals there if he wants to show people. But what other
Here's the immortal jellyfish, the Turritopsis dornii.
What other lessons can we draw from nature?
Oh, I mean, there's a lot of fascinating things. I mean, one that we cannot ignore has to do with robustness, and it's sort of the one of those areas that we don't think too much. Robustness is generally defined as the ability, you said earlier on when we talk about the concept of prevention, the ability to prevent things from happening to you in the first place. Not correcting them, that's resilience. Robustness is the ability to prevent things. And this is what we see when we study the negligibly senescent organisms. So a lot of these organisms that we talk about, the lobsters and the clams and the Greenland shark and all so forth, they do age, but they age extremely slowly. And it's not really a matter in those cases of the ability to repair something like an amphibian's limb. It's the ability to prevent things from happening. And so in that case, there's another wide spectrum of knowledge from a range of species on why they're not impacted, whether it's a specific mutation event, how it's corrected quickly, ultimately if it's a ability of certain cells in their bodies to remove other unfit cells, a very exciting topic known as cellular competition. But the whole area of biologic robustness is one that, in my opinion, is extremely overlooked. We don't really spend a lot of time, maybe it's because it's not as sexy as the other part of the equation, but it's one that for physical and biological immortality in humans we have to solve. And so that is definitely a really exciting one. Obviously, the most interesting probably case that we see on this planet is in Deinococcus radiodurans, which is probably one of the only species that rises from the dead and reassembles completely its shattered genome. It swims around very happily in nuclear waste and other nasty places that it can exist. But once again, a beautiful example of nature and evolution creating this ability already. We've studied how it happens. And once again, it's about translating these concepts of extreme robustness back to humans. But we have a tremendous amount, once again, as I say, to learn from nature's transhumanists.
Yeah, that's nuts. Yeah, you got to take all that in. How do you? I'm so glad you can say all those complex names as well. I have an Australian accent, and it's just going to sound horrible. But Ben, where do you see us going, Ben?
Yes, yes. Well, all of these ideas of from personalized medicine and senolytics, all of these tremendous interventions that we're seeing that were so wonderfully articulated by Ira and Gennady. These things are leading us to having an ability to address these at a broader societal level, whether those be private or public initiatives. I think public initiatives are necessary to do this sort of thing. I would recommend that you listen on Friday afternoon. Paul Spiegel is slated to be on the program to talk about this very subject, which I would like to address as well now, and that is the subject of a shining immortalist city on a hill, in the form of an anti-aging initiative, an anti-aging set of initiatives, and a public health service and public health initiatives that would coexist, that treat aging as a disease, and in doing so, shift the many trillions of dollars that we spend on end-of-life care to be put to greater use to constant oversight and prevention. And that is a better use of those monies. We don't want to begrudge those unwell people those monies today, but we can be doing a lot more with that money by treating those people in this more preventative way. And this is what data science is allowing us to do. It's what breakthroughs in personalized medicine and so forth will be allowing us to do. And people need to embrace this. They need not just to embrace it, but they need to be clamoring for it. And this shining immortalist city on the hill notion, it's very possible that we could see smaller countries begin to do this first in a more comprehensive way, and that would set an example for countries like the U.S. If you haven't seen Ira Pastor's program, you need to subscribe to that program. It's an incredible wealth of information on subjects of this kind. He recently had a discussion of Costa Rica in this very context. Very, very good. I would just in recent days, I would go back and listen to that. This is something that we as a civilization can be doing. We've talked with our friends Kimberly Forsyth. We've talked with our friend Florian Marcus in Estonia about how this high level of digitalization of government services and of the larger society leads us to be able to do this in a very real way. And we are on the precipice of being able to do these things. It's very nice for Ray Kurzweil to anticipate being able to reverse cell death, to be effectively aging in reverse as of 2020 for himself. We want to get everyone there by 2029. And that's his projection. And we do that by having the political will and having the savvy to build these kinds of institutions in the private and public sector.
I'm sorry, gentlemen. I remembered an additional question I wanted to just ask Ira quickly. And why is it that we see different rates of aging in different species? For example, some bees only live 3 or 4 days or a week, and others like the Dariococcus, it dies and then comes back. I mean, why do elephants live to a certain lifespan while cats only live to another, or birds to another? Why do we see that in nature? Is is that sustainable that now all the species have been mixed up all over the place where where some don't have natural predators and they were designed for another region?
Yeah, I mean that's the second part of that is that's a huge question, and especially with the invasive species and so forth. But yeah, I mean the evolution has done some very interesting things in this context, and especially even in organisms of similar families where you have major disparities from a a lifespan perspective. I don't think we know the answers to all of that, but one thing that we do know is that those species that do have substantially extended health spans and lifespans have, when you just really study them, they have sort of this, well, they have two unique properties. One, they either give back quite a bit to the planet in the context of, if you look at things like, the trees that live for hundreds of years, they do things, right, for our ecosystem. They clean the air, they provide oxygen, and they provide food for other species, and they clean the soil and so forth. They have a purpose here. Other species, don't mess too much with everything. They don't take much from the environment. We haven't learned those lessons yet, I don't think. And so I think, aside from sort of the genetics and sort of the evolutionary dynamic that goes on there is clearly as we say, sort of this exogenous interaction with nature from sort of a cosmobiologic perspective, whether it's the air, the water, the electrochemical or electromagnetic dynamic of the Earth itself. All of these things feed in to how that genome ultimately works and how it maintains itself over the period of time, whether we're here for 70 years or 500 years. And I think this is just another question that the tools that are coming and the ones that are here already are going to help us solve. But it is a great question in terms of sort of the evolution and population dynamics in individual different species of organisms.
Thank you very much. All right, so back on track. Gennady, we're talking about radical human life extension, and I know you have a lot of the arguments to dismiss a lot of these questions I'm about to throw at you. But in general, it's kind of a weird feeling when you think about, living for 400 years and your great-great-grandchildren are your friends, and there's just huge societal implications. Putting aside mind uploading and cyberization and other things like that, hypothetically, if biologically we just advanced and lived, what are some of the big societal problems, implications, psychological challenges with families and people staying alive for extended periods of time? What does that do to a society, and how does that change the world? And especially thinking about, we're going interplanetary. There's no question about it that we'll succeed in that. I mean, obviously that's good for space travel, but what about here on Earth?
Yes. Well, I think the weirdness or the perceived weirdness of these future implications of extended lifespans stems solely from people's lack of familiarity with that kind of scenario. The fact is, people have lived in certain societal structures for millennia, and there has been some change, some evolution of those societal structures, but many people have a status quo bias. So whatever they grew up with, whatever they see people around them doing, they consider to be normal and familiar. But that's not necessarily what makes the most sense. Consider, even in today's world, how is it the case that most people are essentially pressured by their biological clocks to reproduce at a time when they don't have that many resources? Most 20 or 30 somethings in the developed world today do not actually have enough resources to even live an independently comfortable life themselves, and yet they're expected to support a family, they're expected to support other human beings who are dependent on them. A much more rational type of structure would be if these people, for instance, pursued their own individual ambitions for a while, let's say until they were 120 years old, and if they remained biologically as young as they were in their 20s or 30s, then maybe they could think, I might give this parenting thing a try. Now that I've accumulated wisdom in life, and I think I have enough resources to give this child a comfortable upbringing and impart some life lessons to this child. But the unfortunate truth is right now, many people are woefully unprepared to be parents. And indeed, the paradoxical fact about the contemporary world is that the people who are the least prepared tend to reproduce at the youngest ages. So we have a situation where a lot of children are growing up with suboptimal upbringings. To some extent, industrialization and the post-industrial world, the proliferation of education, have created more situations where more people wait to have children and therefore give their children more resources, or many people have fewer children than their counterparts would have a few generations ago. So each child gets more resources just by being within a smaller family. And yet, we still have people being pressured by their biological clocks and making these decisions solely because they feel that time is running out. And I think in a lot of other situations, because there's this sense of urgency that arises out of the finitude of lifespans and the finitude of youth, people make suboptimal decisions. And that, I think, is going to change when people have broadened time horizons. They're going to think about each decision more carefully. And I think on balance, people will be inclined to make decisions that are more sustainable over a longer period of time. Now, some people have asserted, for instance, that with longer lifespans, there won't really be permanent relationships as such. I would disagree with that, actually. If you think about how, for instance, marriages and families worked in earlier eras before these trends of combating infectious disease really came to the forefront. Yes, in a lot of societies, for instance, it was expected that if people got married, they would stay married until one of the partners died. But the probability that one of the partners would die within, say, 10 or 15 years was pretty high. And that's what a lot of people don't realize. I think what we're going to see is in a future of indefinite lifespans, people are going to be a lot more careful about entering into relationships. They're going to think about the consequences 100 or 1,000 years hence. But if they do enter into a relationship, it's going to be a lot likelier to last for an indefinite time period.
Ira Pastor, if some of these technologies start to do to create escape velocity and our lives get enhanced more beyond, let's say, beyond 100, 200, 300 years, what are the societal implications of that? What do you see? What do you see as some of the? What do you see?
I see a very positive future as a result of it. And I wanted to add to what I was just saying. Obviously, we're sitting here. We talk about everything that's going on in the area of radical life extension, longevity, escape velocity, and things of this nature. But at the same time, you can't ignore the fact that all of the future support technologies that have tangential roles in this are also being developed alongside of this. I mean, I sit here in Center City, Philadelphia, literally 2 miles away from here, University of Pennsylvania, over Children's Hospital. There is the main lab, that, as far as I'm aware of, that is developing ectogenesis, artificial womb technology. We should talk about the issue of fertility and maybe not having your first child until you're 150 or 200. Some of these, while it's obviously brave new world stuff, these things are being developed. Another couple miles away here at Temple University in Philadelphia, they are developing liquid breathing technologies. Tomorrow, I have actually been an interview with Dr. Kelly Drew at University of Alaska at the Center for Arctic Biology, who is one at the forefront of biohibernation technologies, which we're going to need when we go to Mars and beyond. So I see a very positive future. I think, yeah, obviously there are going to be hiccups and there's going to be a lot of unfamiliarity, as this guy was saying, but the stuff that's going to be happening alongside it, the science fiction future that we've read about for my last 50 years, is being constructed too. And I think that's, going to, tenfold, 100-fold, be more exciting and, potentiating for the human situation than any of these other, what people might call the sort of the downside to some of these things. I think we're just going to surpass it and really be on an amazing trajectory in the coming decades.
Yeah, radical life extension doesn't develop in isolation. That's what I'm hearing, and I totally agree with that.
Exactly.
Ben Zion, if you live long enough, you'll eventually become the president of the United States. Well, anyway, forget that. Where do you see it going? Where do you see society going with hypothetical radical life extension technologies?
Yes, it's true, Steele. Forever's a long time. I can bide my time and wait for that.
Ben Zion 3020.
Yes. Yes. As far as these issues about fertility concerns, what Gennady was saying, very powerful words, and I think that it bears repeating that some of these issues that we see here in the United States, they derive from income insecurity. People being unable to plan families, and there's billions of people the world around who suffer from this kind of insecurity. There's 100+ million people in the United States who are struggling with this kind of insecurity. And even though I am a believer in relatively near-term post-scarcity effects that might negate the need for this, we need stopgap solutions now, so that we do not have our civil society fall into disarray as a result of increasing automation and other effects that are not allowing people to be well and take care of their loved ones. And that is why I would urge everyone to look at the Futurist New Deal for America and consider this $52,000 a year basic income that is described in my platform. This is funded through the federal land dividend, an initiative also first posited by by the founder of this organization, Zoltan Isfin. And it's something that we need to do to take care of our people as we're going through these growing pains of moving into a fully realized post-industrial society. It's not a simple matter. It's not something where we can just sit back and hope for the best. We need to be proactive in creating solutions to this. And to those people who would say that this is an unrealistic prospect, it is not. The federal land dividend could more than pay for this service. We could generate $173 trillion over the course of 10 years, which would more than pay for this basic income for adults 18 to 63. But also, if you are somebody who is expressing concerns about a program like this, you are effectively saying that the economy cannot sustain something like this. You're effectively disavowing the kind of growth that singularitarians routinely espouse. So I wonder what you're doing in a party of techno-optimists if you can't accept that the economy and these areas will be growing enough to sustain this. But it's largely immaterial. People are creating these concerns out of whole cloth for political purposes. But yes, we can address these concerns with the organizing of people's lives, the planning of their families through legislative means and through marketplace solutions as well. We have to consider all of these. So I urge you to again look at the Futurist New Deal for America and vote for me, Ben Zion 2020. We have Just over 48 hours left in our voting cycle for our primary. Please do get out there and vote.
Okay, all right. Thanks, Ben. All right, so is that true, Gennady, that there's only 48 hours left? Is that
Well, there's actually a bit longer than that, because we're going to keep the ballots open through at least Sunday, September 29th, and then it depends on whether we're going to reach our quorum by that time and what the quorum is going to be based on our evaluation of member activity. But right now, we're speaking on Wednesday evening in the United States, so people still have Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and the rest of Wednesday. So about 100, a little more than 100 hours to vote.
all right? So thank you for that correction there, Chairman. That's good. Yeah. So apart from that, the message is, if you're in the USTP, go and vote. Please go and vote. It will help us a lot. That would be really good. So my next question, I guess, is. How do we in the media, and you as USTP members and scientists and people who are watching, the general public, how do we formulate a positive framework against negativity, against Luddites, against anti-vaxxers, against people, the military-industrial complex? How do we battle against these negative forces in a positive way? How do we formulate strategies? How do we work together? How do we build more infrastructure like Singularity Net or Singularity University or the USTP Global, or get people more excited in Elon Musk's ventures, whether that be space, solar, Neuralace, electric cars. How do we get people excited in public health outcomes? How do we make this a rock star movement, something akin to the big concerts that happened in the 80s of Feed the World, etc. How do we formulate a strategy, lay down, get people on board? How do we do that? Gennady, it's all up to you. You got 1 second to work that out.
1 second. Well, these are questions that have been at the forefront of my attention for years. And I believe there's no single strategy. I believe that there are multiple strategies that work for different audiences or different settings. For instance, some people are persuaded by academic literature and statistics of global trends. Other people are not. And other people will not go and seek out that literature. They need another means to get introduced to the ideas of transhumanism. So that's one reason why I wrote a children's book on indefinite life extension, to try to reach a new audience. This is why Zoltan Istvan really inaugurated the era of transhumanist politics by running for president between 2014 and 2016, and why the U.S. Transhumanist Party now is seeking to continue that long-term strategy by essentially injecting transhumanism into the political and policy dialogue. A lot of people pay attention to elections. They pay attention to political debates and discussions, whereas they might not pay attention to academic discussions, even on the same subjects. So it's a matter of reaching different audiences using tactics and venues that those audiences are familiar with. And this is one reason why having a diverse transhumanist movement is so important, because each of us is connected to a different network of people, even if the differences may be slight in certain cases, and each of us has a different skill set to communicate these ideas. Some people may be effective orators, others may be effective writers, others may excel in art and graphic design. And of course, we need a lot of people to do the research and develop the technologies and explain how the technologies work as well. So transhumanism is this broad umbrella movement that seeks to encompass all of these different people and get them to communicate with one another as well, and become familiar with what they're doing and how to leverage one another's skill sets. And it's important that this be done in an open and collaborative manner, not trying to hold back knowledge, not trying to essentially devolve into factionalism, but ultimately doing all this with a recognition that we have a common purpose here. And while we may have differences in style or differences in focus, we're essentially trying to achieve the same goals. One key message that I have for all of the candidates in this USTP election and their supporters would be, once we have a winning candidate, we all need to unite in support of that candidate, no matter what was said or what was done prior to that, because we have to keep the broader goal in mind. And the broader goal is convincing the public that these ideas are worth putting at the forefront of policy, of politics, of society, of public health, of everyday life. And in many ways, a lot of us have said, many people are already implicit transhumanists. They use technology to improve their lives. Their lives are immensely better today than they had been even a generation ago because of technology. And getting that explicit awareness that this is what transhumanism is about is key in order to enable us to effectively advance the next generation of technologies that are really going to revolutionize the world.
Yeah, and it's been really encouraging to see the amount of candidates who are ready to rally behind a single leader. It's been so encouraging. They're all going to, so that's really good, and it's good to hear that sort of positive rhetoric coming out of the candidates. Ira Pastor, how do we make this a rock star movement if that's what you want to achieve?
Absolutely. My goal on a daily basis, putting aside sort of my day job in biotech, is getting the word out, sort of that science can be sexy, that scientists can be rock stars. I spend time. I run the sort of the longevity and aging component of the show known as Idea Me, which is based out of the UK. I want everyone on the show. We're talking about science. I want cutting edge people. I want the bleeding edge people. I want the science fiction people on the show. I want it constantly in the force. So, I'll have a George Church on talking about gene engineering. I'll have Anthony Atala talking about organ bioengineering. And then I'll have Sergio Canavero on talking about head transplants. Do I believe head transplants are coming in the next 10 years? No. But the fact that we think about these things, that we think about the stuff that was science fiction today, can make it science reality then. And if you think 100 years ago, the stuff that we thought was science fiction, whether it was organ transplants or cardiopulmonary resuscitation, might have seemed like science fiction back in the day, are all standard technologies today. But then I'll have other people on the show. As somebody mentioned earlier on, I had the ambassador from Costa Rica to the United States on the show the other day. Here's a beautiful example where we're moving away from science, but we're moving into the sphere of, what's happening elsewhere. I mean, I sit here usually with my US-centric hat on, but I have to realize that there's 200 other plus countries out there where there's other things going on. And, the government of Costa Rica is making longevity and life extension a part of their economic development moving forward. I mean, imagine if we did that here. Obviously, they don't spend any money on the military, and there are also other things they're involved in, but we need to see the holistic picture. The scientists are great. I want to profile the scientists, but I want to talk about the whole picture about how this longevity thing is improving all aspects of society. One other example, we have athletes on the show, not just the ones that are in the sport today, but the ones that are maybe retired but are still young at heart, that are still perpetuating in their specific domain of expertise. Here's another example where we link not just to the science fiction-y stuff, but the things that the average person can relate to, that, hey, yeah, I remember this athlete. They're not as old as, I think of them as they're retired, but they still have that vitality. So once again, it's about bringing everyone to the table, bringing that message, not just, for the few scientists that, they're doing the hot thing in the lab today, but how this impacts everyone, because there's 7 billion of us. And it's going to take more than just, as I said, that white coat scientist turning people on to this concept. It's going to take the whole ecosystem of personalities.
Yeah, I agree. And it sounds like there's a detonation Costa Rica branch opening up real soon. That sounds really good. I want to take a bet with all of you too. I mean, there's two things I want to know. One, how long, how many years or months, how long would you be willing to bet $10 that a mainstream politician is going to say the word transhumanist on a debate stage? And two, which party do you think it would be? Left or the right, I guess, generically. Gennady, what do you reckon? Would you take a bet with me? $10. How many years until the word transhumanist pops up on the stage?
15 years, and it will be a politician from the Transhumanist Party, because by that time both the Republican and the Democratic parties will have imploded, and the Transhumanist Party will essentially walk into the power vacuum.
All right, fantastic. So 15 years, it's going to be a Transhumanist Party person. He's going to say it on the stage. Ira, what do you reckon? How many years until the word transhumanist pops up on a main debate stage in politics?
It all depends. I get in this argument or debate with people quite a bit. It all depends on that first transhumanist inflection, sort of translational inflection moment, whether that's a specific clinical event, in a specific disease, where sort of the basket of transhumanist and transhumanist technologies inflects and really changes the paradigm for a specific in a specific area. I don't know if it'll be left or right. It's clearly going to be some centrist candidate from one of the parties, or the existing parties that we know of today. Hopefully it's the Transhumanist Party, but we'll see. But yeah, hopefully earlier than 15 years.
Earlier than 15? Come on, give me a number. Give me a number. Don't leave me hanging.
8.
8 years. All right. So we got 15. We got 8. Ben Zion, how many years? And then tell us how you're going to make transhumanism a rockstar movement.
Yes. Well, I mean, this isn't necessarily on a debate stage or candidate forum, but I'm fairly certain that candidate Yang in some media appearances of a more informal kind has made references, indirect references to all manner of very transhumanist notions. I think if you go back and watch his appearance in the Joe Rogan program and some others, you can see that pretty well in evidence. I guess to the uttering of one word or another would certainly be nice, and I would imagine maybe that would be happening in the way that you described it, maybe around 2024. But the ideas are equally as important, and we're seeing every day.
So you're rocking in 2024?
Yeah, I think that a candidate might be describing a life extension, a longevity, or transhumanist ideals in 24. I don't think that's
broadening it. Just
okay. Right. So anyway, does this person have to be coming out as a life extension, or having to be make? Okay.
2024. That's your date. Lock that in. It's locked in.
Yes. Yeah. Well, it's interesting that my prognosis is the most conservative on this panel.
Yeah, it really is. I was shocked, actually. All right, Ben, how are you going to make it a rockstar movement?
Yes. I've said it before. I think that it is a job of presenters like myself, in a very real sense, to do what little bit we can to make more persons, so to speak, like Ira Pastor, doing this very good work that needs done. And but Ira moments ago mentioned the whole picture of looking at this, and that is and in what I mentioned a moment ago is not the whole picture. The whole picture is also that by having a society where scientism is embraced, where anti-science sentiments are discarded as a matter of course, where this kind of mental fitness is an organizing principle for the society. There's an awful lot of opportunities that derive from that in many other ways other than just pure research and development, and that is worth repeating. we are doing a disservice to people by not embracing this as a society, by not embracing this in legislative realms as well. I've like to think of this a thought experiment of the feral Einstein, a person who would have been a genius, but does not have access to the resources that they should have, and that in some sense describes almost an awful lot of people, to some degree everyone, in an economically insecure kind of framework. And what we can do is move beyond that with the kinds of initiatives described in the Futurist New Deal for America, and with an unflinching embrace of scientific ideas and scientific engagement and unbridled enthusiasm for that. That is something, and maybe like others were saying in this talk, maybe that's not the sexiest thing to some people's thinking, but it is the good that we can do to orient our society to better things.
All right, thank you very much. And final thoughts. I just want to go around for final thoughts while we wrap up here for this fantastic longevity debate. And if you want, mention mind uploading, mention becoming cyborgs, mention anything else you want to talk about in that context. If you can bring those into it, because I think we're focusing a lot on biological longevity, and until we know and understand consciousness, it actually is the better topic to talk about, because mind uploading and all that is purely speculative, and also talk about the fact that we could hit the Turing test, and if we eventually pass the Turing test, radical life extension, it's going to get enhanced. Either it's going to get enhanced, or or these beings are now new conscious beings that will have to be assisted or looked after or philosophically considered as new life, as beings with life and consciousness as we know it. So final thoughts, and talk about mind uploading, becoming a cyborg, and the emergence of conscious AI. Chairman, actually, we'll go backwards and we'll end on. So Ben Zion, you go first, and then we'll work our way back.
Yes. Well, the state of advanced algorithms today, it's quite impressive. Google had announced that they had achieved a quantum supremacy benchmark, a calculation that was almost unfathomable. Being completed by other machines at the present time. So this is a sign of the times in terms of a move towards advanced algorithms, and we're seeing other moves towards cyborgization that are quite hopeful. I think reasonable people can disagree as to the state of brain-computer interfaces in organizations like the Neuralink organization, as to their utility for normally abled people as opposed to otherly abled people. But it is quite impressive that we are talking about these prototypes and that they seem to be viable. That there is a primate, a small monkey, who is effectively using this kind of brain-computer interface right now. 10,000 neurons are connected to their machine. This is effectively, to some degree, an uplifted creature, and it certainly bodes well for human beings starting to be able to do more work in this way, and creating maybe a snowball effect towards things like mind uploading, which, as you said, it remains rather speculative, rather to biomedical interventions, but an exciting prospect, and I do believe a relatively near-term prospect. I look forward to seeing how that unfolds in the coming years.
Thank you very much, Ben. Thanks for all your comments, and thanks for coming on Detonation. I really appreciate it. Very good comments. Ira Pasta, final comments. Yeah, mind uploading is still speculative. We might become cyborgs, and or like the Sens model. What do you say?
Well, I'll venture outside of my. I'm more of a biologic person, but I'll venture outside of my comfort zone. As at the Idea Me show, we spend a lot of time talking to these folks. We had Stephen Ferber on a few months ago from University of Manchester, who's working with the Spinnaker computer, the probably the most complex computer in the world, with something like 1 million. This neuromorphic computing stuff, so probably one of the more complex projects to emulate the human brain. Next week, actually, I have Alice Parker from USC coming on, so I understand the potential of it all, and it's an amazing area. A couple weeks ago, we had Tilly Lockey from the UK come on the show. She's the real Alita that people might know from the movie, who is sort of demonstrating sort of where we've come with next generation bionics and prosthetics along those lines. And then we have other people that come on and talk about the unique nature of, as you were saying, we don't understand consciousness that well, but we are getting a deeper understanding of what a unique universe exists with between our ears and that couple pounds of stuff inside the skull. So I don't know when mind uploading or partial mind uploading or whatever is going to get here. But as a biology guy, I can really appreciate some of these guests that are coming on the show, and I can confidently say that it's coming. So it's coming in some fashion. Whether it's going to be 50 years or 100 years from now, I don't know. But I think there's one very important point to come out of it. We all say these types of projects, as science fiction as they may seem, whether it's neuromorphic computing or head transplants or whatever it may be, need to be worked on today. Not 100 years from now, not 500 years from now. And that's I always argue with the cryonics people that want to say there's going to be a lot of smart people 500 years from now that will figure out how to reanimate somebody. No. We need to work on those issues today so that we can get there. So I think it's a very exciting area in general, but we got to start doing it today. And really, we need to say more people working in this area. We really need more people risking their time on the science fiction, because that science fiction becomes science reality. And I'll leave it at that.
And something that really got me into the biological systems was a game called Biosis. It was a 1995 game, and you play as a character called Alan Russell, who suffers a sort of PTSD or a shock, because basically the game is based on the Arizona lab, the Biosphere project. And the human habitat burns down, and you start the game, and essentially you have to survive as a sort of animal inside of this burnt down laboratory, which has a couple of different functioning biomes. The savanna is functioning, the rainforest is functioning, the ocean is functioning, and you have to sort of survive as an animal with the human habitat sustaining you, and it's very interesting and it's very exciting, and it really teaches you how closed the system is, how closed the Earth system is, and how all of the different biomes really interact with each other, and how air quality is really important. And when I play that game, it really woke me up to I played it a long time ago. It really woke me up to the small nature of how finite Earth is, and how fragile some of Earth's systems are. And talking about longevity. For me, as biological creatures, it's about getting the mix. It's getting the balance right between having good sustainable people and a good sustainable environment, and these other things as well. Gennady, final comments and talking about, if you want to bring in mind uploading, which is speculative, and we're working on reverse brain engineering and all that sort of stuff. But if you want to bring in mind uploading, you can, or cyborgization, or whatever you would like.
Yes, certainly. So my thoughts on mind uploading can be found in two earlier essays of mine. One is from 2010, titled "How Can I Live Forever? What Does and Does Not Preserve the Self?" And the other is a later essay from circa 2013 called "Transhumanism and Mind Uploading Are Not the Same," where I take a bit more of a cautious approach toward mind uploading, because from my standpoint, the priority is to preserve the continuity of what I call the I-ness, the vantage point upon the world that each of us have, where I perceive existence as myself and not as you, Steele, and you perceive existence as Steele Archer and not as Gennady Stolyarov II. And I am concerned about an uploading process, especially if it's destructive or involves discontinuities, essentially creating a copy of a person rather than perpetuating the original. And while having the copy of a person may be useful to other people who want to interact with a plausible simulacrum of the original individual, that's not going to help the original individual persist. So I think it's very important to consider which changes to the organism actually preserve this continuity of awareness and identity that we're ultimately seeking to perpetuate with indefinite life extension. The biological approaches are certainly safer in this regard. That being said, I do support cyborgization, and to a great extent, cyborgization has been occurring already. There are artificial limbs that are increasingly functional. There are hearing aids, for instance, that are integrated into the brain. There are various brain augmentation devices, with Neuralink being an ambitious project to take that to the next level. And I think that's going to continue. The interaction between biology and technology, with both new biological augmentations and new artificial augmentations being developed. My core argument is there needs to be a continuity of process that is preserved as these augmentations are added. So it's a kind of ship of Theseus argument. If you can replace one component at a time, while the process that is life and the process that is consciousness are ongoing, then yes, in a few decades, we could have humans, the majority of whose parts are essentially artificial. But that's going to be necessarily a gradual, incremental process. And I would encourage you to read my essays if you wish to know more of my thoughts on that. Once again, How Can I Live Forever? What Does and Does Not Preserve the Self? And Transhumanism and Mind Uploading Are Not the Same. With that, I recognize there are different perspectives on the subject within the transhumanist movement, and this is definitely an area that needs to be studied and explored further, where both the hard sciences and philosophy have a lot to offer. Now, also by way of concluding remarks, I would like to emphasize to each person watching this panel that you can make a difference within the transhumanist movement. You can make a difference in terms of advocating for life extension to come about in our lifetimes, no matter what skill set you bring to the table. Even if you're not a research scientist, that's fine. I'm certainly not a research scientist myself, but I have asked myself the question for many years, what kind of unique contributions can I make to this field? And while for a number of years that involved considerable exploration on my part, trying various approaches, seeing what worked, and essentially over time building my reputation in the community, eventually the answers to those questions became quite clear. And I have reached a point where I've made several notable, unique contributions to this movement. I would suggest that you can as well. wherever you're starting from, just get involved, read the literature, communicate with other figures in the movement, and you will discover where there is low-hanging fruit that your skill set can uniquely enable you to reach. And finally, if you are already a member of the U.S. Transhumanist Party, I once again encourage you, check your email for your ballot and vote. It is, once again, one of those contributions that is really easy to make. It doesn't take a long time, but you'll be part of history, and you'll be part of pushing this movement forward.
Very, very encouraging words. Thank you very much, Gennady. And yeah, if you are, go out and vote. Also, Detonation's back, so if you're a regular and you're watching this, you know, get in touch and let's talk and let's get this moving back into a direction of continuous coverage, because we don't want to stop, even though that the campaign is almost over. That would be tragic. And Ira Pastor, I'll have to talk to you a lot about different contacts and things like that, because it sounds absolutely great. So thank you so much, everybody, for coming on. That was a very, very gentlemanly discussion. I think we had a lot of fun. We made a lot of progress, so we covered a lot of different topics. You know, I started with live forever or die trying. You know, I essentially agree. Gennady, I just wanted to ask you one quick thing. Would you jump into a teleporter?
Well, I'd have to understand the principles behind that teleporter. The Star Trek type of teleporter that disassembles you atom by atom and reassembles you at the other side, I don't think that would preserve the continuity of Inus. So I would not jump into that kind of teleporter. Now, if the teleporter itself actually created a shortcut between two locations, essentially a wormhole, a tunnel you could step into, yes, that would be a different type of teleporter, and that I think I could comfortably utilize.
All right, fantastic. That's good to know. Personally, yeah, see, that's the difference with me. I would jump into that Star Trek teleporter. I don't have an issue with that. But anyway, all right. Thank you so much, gentlemen. And yeah, we had a good talk, and everyone's happy, and it's really good. So, all more coming to you all this way, Detonation, and thank you, everyone. And go out and vote. Thank you very much.